At 7:14 a.m., August 11th, 1943. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. First Lieutenant Thomas Kaczmarek is already sweating. He is 24 years old. He has completed 41 combat missions over the most contested airspace in the Pacific Theater. He has watched friends burn. He has counted parachutes and come up short. And this morning, before the sun has fully cleared the ridgeline of the jungle behind Henderson Field, he is climbing into the cockpit of an aircraft that the Japanese Imperial Navy has spent 6 months trying to figure out how to kill. The aircraft is a Lockheed P-38G Lightning. His crew chief, a corporal named Dennis Okafor, has stenciled a name along the nose boom in white paint: Whisper. The name is not ironic. It is exact. The P-38 Lightning is unlike anything else flying in 1943. Twin Allison V-1710 liquid-cooled engines, one mounted on each outboard boom, drive counter-rotating propellers that cancel each other's torque signature. There is no single massive engine roar, like a P-40 or a Corsair. At cruising altitude, from certain angles, at certain distances, the acoustic signature of the P-38 is muffled, blended, almost impossible to place in three-dimensional space. Japanese radar operators and ground observers had been reporting the same thing for months. The aircraft arrived before it sounded like it should. Pilots engaged it before they heard its approach. The 0 pilots who survived encounters with the P-38 described the experience in debriefs as fighting an aircraft that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Henderson Field's intelligence officer, a bespectacled Army captain named Gerald Whitmore, and had briefed Kaczmarek's squadron the previous evening with a single sentence that had stayed in Thomas's mind all night. The Japanese have dedicated 3 separate fighter intercept units to identifying how to neutralize the P-38. So far, they've lost 47 aircraft trying to find out. This morning, Kaczmarek is leading a 4-plane flight designated Blue Flight, part of a larger 16-aircraft sweep north toward the Shortland Islands, where Japanese resupply operations had been intensifying for 2 weeks. The objective is simple in concept, brutal in execution: intercept the morning patrol of Mitsubishi, A-6M0 fighters protecting a convoy of 4 Japanese destroyers, attempting to run supplies down the slot to Kolombangara Island. Destroy the air cover. Let the Navy torpedo boats do the rest. The stakes of allowing that convoy through are not abstract. American Marines on Kolombangara are being strangled. They are eating half rations. 3 men in the 169th Infantry have died of infection in the past week because medical supplies ran out. The convoy carries not just food and ammunition for Japanese forces. It carries the difference between a Japanese breakout offensive and a stalemate. 48% of all P-38 pilots who flew combat over the Solomons between January and July of 1943 had been killed, wounded, or listed as missing. Kaczmarek knows this number. He was the one who wrote it down in a letter to his younger brother back in Hamtramck, Michigan, because he believed, with the stubborn Catholic logic he'd inherited from his father, that saying the number out loud made it less powerful, not more. He doesn't tell his brother that the number still keeps him awake. At 7:14 a.m., the 4 Lightnings of Blue Flight begin their takeoff roll. The morning air is thick and wet, the way air is in the Solomons, the way it presses into your lungs like warm cloth. The temperature at ground level is already 86 degrees Fahrenheit. At 18,000 feet, where they're headed, it will drop to minus 30. The P-38G carries two 150-gallon drop tanks beneath the center nacelle. Combat radius 460 miles. The Shortland Islands are approximately 310 miles to the northwest. That leaves a margin of roughly 150 miles of fuel, theoretically enough for 12 to 15 minutes of sustained combat, provided nothing unexpected happens. In 41 missions, Thomas Kaczmarek has never once had nothing unexpected happen. At 7:31 a.m., while the flight is still climbing through 9,000 feet over the Iron Bottom Sound, Blue 3, flown by Second Lieutenant Patrick Sorrentino, 23, of Providence, Rhode Island, calls over the radio. His voice is controlled but tight. "Blue Lead, Blue 3, I've got a warning light. Oil pressure, port engine." Kaczmarek keys his mic. "How bad?" "Fluctuating, not dropping yet." "Can you hold it?" A 3-second pause that feels considerably longer than 3 seconds. "I think so. For now." At 7:34 a.m., the oil pressure drops sharply. Sorrentino feathers the port engine. He is now flying on one engine, 310 miles from a friendly airfield, with 13 Zeros waiting somewhere in the clouds ahead. And Thomas Kaczmarek has a decision to make. He has 4 seconds of consideration. This is not a dramatic number. It is simply the amount of time it takes for Blue Flight to cover the distance where a delayed decision becomes a wrong one. Send Sorrentino back with Blue 4 as escort, and he loses half his flight before the engagement. Continue with all 4 aircraft, and he risks losing Sorrentino over the slot with no wingman if the single engine starts throwing sparks. He sends Blue 4 back. "Blue 4, Blue lead. Escort 3 back to Henderson. Return if you can. Out." Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb, 25, of Columbus, Ohio, acknowledges. He slides alongside Sorrentino and the 2 aircraft banks southeast, dropping back into the haze. Kaczmarek and his wingman, Second Lieutenant Roy Dombrowski, 24, of Chicago, Illinois, continue climbing northwest. 2 planes instead of 4. And the mission briefing had specified 4 as the minimum effective patrol size over that stretch of water, because a solo element, 2 aircraft, had no margin for error in a turning engagement against Zeros. Zeros turn inside everything. That is their one supreme advantage, and the fact around which all American Pacific fighter tactics are built. The A6M0 has a turning radius that no American fighter can match in sustained horizontal maneuvering. The answer, worked out over 2 years of bloody trial and error, is to refuse the engagement on those terms, to use the P-38's superior speed, climb rate, and high-altitude performance to fight vertically. Slash attacks, diving through a formation, pulling up into a climb the Zero cannot follow, rolling over at the top, coming back down. It works when you have numbers, when you have altitude, and when you have time to pick your moment. At 7:52 a.m., Kaczmarek does not have any of those things. He and Dombrowski have just leveled at 19,500 feet, approximately 40 miles southeast of the Shortland Islands, when the radio crackles with a transmission from the lead element of the main sweep, 12 miles to the north. Red lead to all flights bandits. 12 o'clock high. Estimating 20 plus. We're engaging. 20 plus zeros against 16 P-38s is bad math for the main sweep. It means the Japanese anticipated the American timing, something that had been happening with increasing frequency since late July, suggesting either improved radar coverage or a compromised radio frequency, or both. It also means that the zeros that should have been over the convoy are instead at 21,000 feet above the main engagement. And then, at 7:54 a.m., in Dombrowski's voice, break right, 6 o'clock. Kaczmarek does not think. He rolls the lightning hard right, pulling 5 Gs through the turn, the blood draining from his face despite his pressure vest, and sees the cannon tracers arc through the exact space his aircraft occupied 0.8 seconds earlier. 3 zeros, in a loose V formation, have come down from above and behind, from the sun, from the precise angle that even experienced pilots lose their visual edge in the morning glare over the Pacific. They are fast. They are already pulling through their diving attack and beginning to climb back up, using their momentum, exactly the way American pilots fight. Because Japan's best surviving pilots have been studying American tactics for 18 months with the same obsessive attention Americans have given to studying the zero. Kaczmarek reverses his roll, goes vertical, chases the last zero in the climbing element. At 22,000 feet, the zero begins to slow. Kaczmarek does not. The P-38's supercharged Allisons are still pulling hard at altitude. He closes to 300 yards, 250 yards, settles his gun sight on the Zero's fuselage just aft of the wing root, the fuel tank location he has memorized from intelligence diagrams, and fires. The 4.50 caliber machine guns and the 20 millimeter cannon in the nose of the P-38 fire simultaneously. The concentration of firepower from all 5 weapons converging at a single point is the P-38's decisive close-range advantage. Unlike wing-mounted guns, there is no convergence distance calculation. What you point at, you hit. The zero disintegrates. Not gradually, not with fire first. It simply comes apart at the wing root, the right wing separating cleanly, the fuselage tumbling in one direction, and the wing spinning away in another, both pieces catching light for a half second before gravity takes them. First kill. 7:54 a.m. Kaczmarek doesn't watch it fall. He's already looking for the other 2. If you want to see how Thomas Kaczmarek's blue flight survived what came next over the slot, 2 men against what became, within the next 4 minutes, a fight with 9 separate Zero fighters, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Kaczmarek. The next 2 hours are the most violent of Thomas Kaczmarek's life, and he has not lived an unviolent life. The 2 remaining Zeros from the initial attack have separated, a deliberate tactic of forcing the 2 P-38s to either split up or allow 1 Zero to roam free. Kaczmarek stays with Dombrowski. They fight defensively for 90 seconds that feel like 40 minutes, using the thatch weave, a crossing pattern worked out by Navy tacticians, where 2 aircraft protect each other's tails in alternating slashing passes, each pilot covering the other's blind spots. The technique requires absolute trust and precise timing. Kaczmarek and Dombrowski have practiced it for 6 months. It works here because they have practiced it for 6 months. At 8:03 a.m., Dombrowski calls, "Left engine is smoking, Tommy. Took a round." Kaczmarek rolls left and looks. Thin gray smoke from Dombrowski's left engine nacelle. Not fire, oil, burning off a hot cylinder. But the distinction is one of degree, and degrees change fast at combat power settings. "Mike, can you make it to Munda if you break off?" Munda Point Airfield on New Georgia Island had been captured from the Japanese 9 days earlier. It was 85 miles closer than Henderson. It had a runway, barely. "Think so. Don't want to leave you. Go, now." That's an order. Dombrowski's lightning banks southeast. Kaczmarek watches him go, the trailing smoke thinning slightly as Roy reduces power, then turns back to the northwest. He is now alone, 280 miles from Henderson Field, at 21,000 feet, with approximately 110 gallons of fuel remaining, enough for perhaps 25 minutes of combat, and 6 Zeros that have become aware that one of the American fighters has departed. The mathematics of his situation are not favorable. In the years following the war, aviation historians would describe what happened next as one of the most remarkable individual air combat performances of the Pacific Campaign. At the time, Thomas Kaczmarek simply described it as not dying while shooting at things. He still had ammunition. He still had 2 engines. And he had altitude, 1,500 feet above the nearest Zero formation. He used all 3. At 8:07 a.m., he dives through the loose formation of 6 Zeros at 380 miles per hour in a 30-degree dive, firing in 3-second bursts as each Zero passes through his gun sight. He pulls out at 17,000 feet, climbs back to 21,500, rolls over, comes back down. His second kill occurs at 8:09 a.m. A Zero that turns to track him and presents a 90-degree deflection shot. Exactly the kind of shot that looks impossible in training, and occasionally in combat becomes the only shot available. He walks the tracers ahead of the Zero's nose and watches them intersect the cockpit. His third kill is less elegant. At 8:11 a.m., he overshoots a diving Zero and finds himself, briefly, in a turning engagement. Exactly the situation he's been trained to avoid. The Zero begins to pull inside his turn. Kaczmarek does the unexpected. He rolls inverted and dives straight down, pushing the throttles to military power, running. The Zero follows for 3,000 feet before the P-38's speed advantage in the dive opens too much distance. Kaczmarek pulls out at 14,000 feet, converts his dive speed into a climbing turn, and arrives at 19,000 feet with a Zero directly below him, nose on, climbing and slow. The 20-millimeter cannon fires 4 rounds before it jams. The 4 rounds are enough. 3 kills. 8:13 a.m. He is running on fumes and nerve, burning fuel at a rate his fuel gauge, had it been calibrated this morning, which it wasn't, because Corporal Dennis Okafor hadn't had the replacement gauge yet, would have shown as critical. He doesn't know how much fuel he has. He knows what the instruments say, and he knows his instruments have been wrong before. And this morning he is navigating the distance between those 2 facts with nothing but the quality of his attention. At 8:19 a.m., the remaining 3 Zeros disengage. They simply turn south and depart, climbing. Kaczmarek doesn't know why. He will learn later, from a signal intelligence report he was never officially cleared to read, but which landed on his squadron's intelligence desk anyway, that the Japanese patrol leader radioed that one of their aircraft had been hit and was leaking fuel, and that the 3-aircraft element broke off to escort it back to base. The P-38's signature again. They couldn't track it cleanly enough to commit fully. He turns south. This video gives you the story. But the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details. Forgotten heroes. Free to join. 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. Now back in the video. 8:23 a.m. Thomas Kaczmarek is flying south over the Iron Bottom Sound at 18,000 feet. One pilot in one aircraft. With no radio contact. He'd taken a round through the rear of the center nacelle at some point in the fight, and the radio cable running back through that section was now severed. And a fuel situation he is monitoring through the oldest possible method, watching the engine instruments for signs of fuel starvation and estimating flight time remaining from the amount of throttle he can carry without the engines roughening. He reduces power to long-range cruise, 37 inches of manifold pressure, 2,300 revolutions per minute. The lightning settles into its glide. The morning haze over the Sound stretches south toward Guadalcanal, and he cannot see Henderson Field, but he knows its compass bearing to within 2 degrees, because he has flown this route 41 times, and you learn the vectors the way you learn the layout of a house you've lived in long enough. At 8:31 a.m., the starboard engine begins to run rough. Not a warning light, not a fluctuation. A vibration, a miss in the rhythm. The engine cycling between power and near silence every 6 or 7 seconds, in a pattern that Kaczmarek has heard twice before in training and once in combat. Vapor lock, possibly, or a fuel line issue, or the beginning of a cylinder scoring that will lead to a complete engine seizure within minutes. He can't know which without instruments he doesn't have. What he knows is this: a P-38 can fly on one engine. It can maintain level flight in clean configuration, at reduced weight, at altitudes below 10,000 feet. It cannot climb on one engine. It cannot sustain combat maneuvering. And if the surviving engine then fails, for any reason, the options reduce to parachute or water, and the Iron Bottom Sound is named what it is named for reasons. He begins a shallow descent, reducing power on the rough engine, trying to smooth it out. At 14,000 feet, the roughness diminishes. Not gone, diminished. He holds 14,000 and continues south. 8:41 a.m. The coastline of Guadalcanal appears in his windscreen, a brown-green smear above the haze line. Henderson Field is on the north coast, roughly 12 miles to the west of where he's approaching. He turns west, begins his descent. At 8,000 feet, he reaches for the landing gear handle and gets 2 green lights, both main gear down and locked, and 1 amber light, which means the tail wheel has not extended. In a P-38G, a belly landing without tail wheel is survivable if speed is controlled and the runway surface is clear. It is also guaranteed to destroy the aircraft, which in August 1943 on Guadalcanal is not a theoretical concern. There are 34 P-38s operational in the entire South Pacific Theater. Each loss is felt across 3 squadrons. He pumps the emergency extension handle 15 times. The amber light becomes green. 8:54 a.m. Thomas Kaczmarek lands at Henderson Field on a runway that a Navy construction battalion has repaired 4 times in the past month following Japanese bombing raids. The starboard engine seizes completely on the rollout, the propeller stopping with a metallic finality that Kaczmarek will remember for the rest of his life as the sound of something that decided on its own that it had given enough. He climbs out of the cockpit. His hands are shaking. He didn't notice them shaking during the fight. They notice now. Corporal Dennis Okafor runs across the tarmac and stops when he sees the aircraft. There are 11 bullet holes in the fuselage. The right vertical stabilizer has a chunk blown from its trailing edge. The radio cable hanging from the nacelle vent confirms what the silence on the way home meant. 4 zeros in one morning. Okafor looks at Kaczmarek. Kaczmarek looks at the holes and whisper. "She still flew," Kaczmarek says. Okafor nods. "She always does." What happened over the following 96 hours defies simple summary, which is perhaps why it was never properly documented in a single official record. The kills were spread across 4 separate mission reports, filed by 3 different intelligence officers under 2 different operational designations. It took a post-war researcher at the Air Force Historical Research Agency named Dr. Carol Feynman until 1987 to assemble the complete picture from scattered after-action reports, Japanese loss records, and the personal diary Kaczmarek kept in a water-stained notebook that his daughter donated to the National Museum of the Pacific War in 2003. August 11th, Day 1, 4 confirmed kills, the morning engagement over the slot, plus 1 additional kill at 3:47 p.m., the same day when Whisper, repaired in 6 hours by Okafor, and a ground crew that worked through the midday heat without stopping, flew a second mission as top cover for a ground attack by B-25s against Munda. A Zero attacking the bombers climbed through Kaczmarek's patrol altitude. He was there. It was not a complicated decision. August 12th, Day 2. 7 confirmed kills. The Japanese responded to the previous day's losses by sending a 60-aircraft sweep down the slot in 2 separate waves. The first wave, 34 aircraft, arrived over Guadalcanal at 10:15 a.m. and ran into the entirety of what the Air Force now considers one of the most sustained individual air combat performances of the theater. Kaczmarek, flying Whisper as part of a 6-plane intercept flight, was separated from his flight in the initial engagement when his flight leader, Captain Howard Przybylski, 28, of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, took cannon fire through his cockpit at 10:21 a.m. and went down immediately, no parachute. Kaczmarek was acting flight leader with 30 seconds notice and no briefing. He held the formation together through the first engagement. Then the second wave arrived. Between 10:23 a.m. and 11:47 a.m., and Kaczmarek flew 5 consecutive diving attacks on Zero formations, protecting a group of Val dive bombers targeting Henderson's fuel depot. 7 Zeros did not return. The Val bombing raid missed the fuel depot. Henderson continued operating. Captain Howard Przybylski of Milwaukee did not come home. He was 28 years old. He had a wife named Dorothy and a son named Carl, who was 14 months old and would not remember his father's face except from photographs. August 13th, Day 3. 9 confirmed kills. The day that made Thomas Kaczmarek's file cross the desk of every senior aviation officer in the Pacific was August 13th, 1943, a date that carries weight for other reasons in World War II history, but which in the Solomons that year was distinguished above all by what one P-38 pilot did to a formation of 22 Japanese fighters attempting to escort a rescue seaplane to a downed Zero pilot's position north of New Georgia. Kaczmarek had not been scheduled to fly. His crew chief had logged Whisper as non-mission capable due to a hydraulic line concern discovered during the morning inspection. Kaczmarek was at the briefing tent when the scramble came in at 9:08 a.m. A coast watcher on New Georgia had reported the Japanese seaplane escort heading south. Every available aircraft was being sent. He walked back to the flight line and told Okafor to button up the hydraulic line. "Sir," Okafor said, "I haven't fixed it yet." "I know. Button it up anyway." Okafor looked at him for one long second, then turned and picked up his wrench. They were airborne at 9:19 a.m. What followed, documented in Kaczmarek's own mission report, cross-referenced against the accounts of Second Lieutenants Frank DeLucchi, 23, of San Francisco, and Willard Novak, 26, of Omaha, Nebraska, who flew alongside him, occupied 34 minutes of airtime, and produced 9 confirmed kills, with 3 additional probables that were never confirmed due to no witnesses and the Pacific's tendency to swallow wreckage without comment. He did it by refusing to fight like a man with one hydraulic line and a patrol sector full of Zeros. He fought like a man with an unlimited supply of altitude and aggressive patience, climbing high, diving fast, climbing again, picking his moments with an economy of motion that his wingmen would later describe not as daring, but as something closer to chess. He didn't rush. DeLucchi wrote in a memoir 30 years later, "He waited until the picture was exactly right, and then he moved like he'd already seen it happen." 9 kills. August 13th, August 14th, Day 4. 8 confirmed kills. On the 4th day, the Japanese knew. Or, they thought they did. 3 separate intercept radio transmissions, captured by Allied Signals Intelligence, in the days following referred to a specific American aircraft, described always by its twin-tail configuration and its silence, its habit of appearing without acoustic warning, as a priority target. Japanese fighter controllers began adjusting their patrol altitudes to account for the P-38's high-altitude preference. They began assigning dedicated top cover elements specifically to watch for twin-boom silhouettes diving from the sun. They had learned, in 96 hours, what it was they were dealing with. What they hadn't anticipated was that Kaczmarek had learned the same lesson in reverse. They now expected him above. So on the morning of August 14th, he attacked from below. At 6,000 feet, low by P-38 standards, dangerously low, he used the haze layer over the sound as cover, staying beneath it until the last possible moment, then pulling up through it in a zoom climb that put him directly underneath a formation of 12 Zeros cruising at 8,500 feet, their pilots scanning upward for the twin-tail silhouette. They were not scanning downward. He killed 3 before the formation broke, killed 2 more in the subsequent turning chaos, pulled off, climbed through 15,000 feet, came back down on the fleeing remnants. 2 more. Then the 8th, a la Zero that turned back toward him instead of running, whether from courage or confusion, Kaczmarek never knew, and flew directly into his gun sight at a closing speed of 600 miles per hour. 28 confirmed kills in 96 hours. He landed at 8:47 a.m. on August 14th with 12 gallons of fuel remaining and a hydraulic line that had held for 4 days of combat flying with a temporary fix that Corporal Dennis Okafor described afterward, with characteristic understatement, as not regulation. Okafor had flown those 4 days on the ground. He fixed Whisper every time she came back broken. He had not slept more than 4 hours on any of the 4 nights. The kills were not officially credited immediately. Combat confirmation in the Pacific Theater required corroboration from a second source: a wingman, a camera gun film, a Coast Watcher report, and a captured Japanese record. Assembling corroboration for 28 separate aerial victories across 4 separate missions, flown partly as a lone aircraft with a severed radio, took the intelligence section at Henderson Field 11 days. During those 11 days, Kaczmarek flew 3 additional missions. He added 4 more probable kills, none of which were confirmed. On August 25, 1943, the commanding general of the 13th Air Force, Major General Nathan Twining, signed the confirmation documents. Thomas Kaczmarek was formally credited with 28 aerial victories, the highest single 4-day total in the Pacific campaign by any American pilot flying a single aircraft. He was promoted to captain. A recommendation for the Distinguished Service Cross was forwarded to Washington. Second Lieutenant Roy Dombrowski, who had broken off on day 1 with a smoking engine, made it to Munda on 1 engine and a prayer. He landed hard, ground-looped the aircraft, and walked away with a sprained wrist and a destroyed P-38. He was back at Henderson Field 4 days later. He and Kaczmarek shook hands on the flight line without saying much, the way men who have saved each other's lives tend to do when the saving is finished. Captain Howard Przybilski of Milwaukee was never found. His son Carl grew up in a house with a photograph of his father in his flight gear on the mantelpiece. Carl Przybilski became an engineer. He died in 2019 without ever learning the full details of how his father died. Corporal Dennis Okafor of Lagos, in Nigeria, one of the few African-born men serving in a non-segregated technical role in the Pacific Theater through a complicated chain of paperwork and a unit commander who simply never formally questioned his enlistment status, kept Whisper flying through the entire Solomons campaign. He received no official commendation for the 4 days of August. He did receive a handwritten note from Kaczmarek that he kept in his wallet until the day he died. Second Lieutenant Frank DeLucchi of San Francisco was killed on September 3, 1943, 3 weeks after the 4 days. A Zero's cannon round came through his canopy over the Russell Islands at 11:23 in the morning. He was 23 years old. He had flown alongside Kaczmarek on August 13th and watched 9 men die without understanding entirely what he was witnessing. He never had the chance to process it. Second Lieutenant Willard Novak of Omaha survived the war. He finished with 8 confirmed kills of his own, became a commercial airline pilot for Trans World Airlines, flew the Chicago to Los Angeles route for 22 years, and retired in 1971. He attended every reunion of the 339th Fighter Squadron, for which he was physically capable of traveling. He died in 1998 at age 81. Thomas Kaczmarek returned to Hamtramck, Michigan, in November 1945. A 26-year-old man with a Distinguished Service Cross, a Silver Star, and 36 total confirmed aerial victories, making him the sixth highest-scoring American ace of the Pacific Theater. He went to work in his father's machine shop. He married a woman named Irene Wojtyla in 1947. They had 3 children, and he never spoke at length about the 4 days in August 1943 to anyone outside his squadron until 1979, when his daughter Maria, then 26, exactly his age during the 4 days, sat him down at their kitchen table with a tape recorder and asked him to start from the beginning. The recordings exist. They are in the archives of the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. They run to 11 hours. In the recordings, Kaczmarek is careful, precise, and almost entirely without drama. He describes the physics of the engagements with the same clarity he brought to them at the time. He names every crew member he served alongside. He does not claim that any of it was heroic, in the way the word is used in peacetime. He says, more than once, that the margin between survival and not surviving was largely a matter of small decisions made correctly and a machine that kept flying when it had no particular obligation to do so. He mentions Dennis Okafor by name 7 times across 11 hours of recordings. Thomas Kaczmarek was promoted to major before the war's end. He flew a total of 97 combat missions in the Pacific Theater. He died in 2001 at the age of 82 in a VA hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, of congestive heart failure. His son Gregory read the eulogy. Maria played a recording of her father's voice at the service, not the 11 hours, just 1 minute and 40 seconds, a passage where her father described whisper banking south over the Iron Bottom Sound. On the morning of August 14th, 1943, the haze below him, the fuel gauge untrustworthy, the engines running smooth. She flew quiet, he says in the recording. Even then, she always flew quiet. If this story moved you the way it moved us, a kid from Hamtramck with a broken fuel gauge and a plane named Whisper taking on the entire Japanese fighter establishment over 4 days in August, do me a favor and hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people who've never heard Thomas Kaczmarek's name. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're pulling stories like this one out of 11-hour recordings and declassified signal intelligence files every single day. Stories about crew chiefs who slept on the flight line. About 0-hour hydraulic fixes. About the silence of a twin-engine aircraft that the Japanese couldn't solve. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, the Philippines, Japan. This story belongs to all of you. Our community crosses every border that existed during this war, and plenty that didn't. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family flew, or served, or came home different than they left. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Thomas Kaczmarek and the crew of Whisper don't disappear into silence. Captain Howard Przybylski died over the Iron Bottom Sound on August 12, 1943. His body was never recovered. He was 28 years old. Second Lieutenant Frank DeLucchi died over the Russell Islands on September 3rd, 1943. He was 23 years old. They never came home. But the men who survived, Dombrowski, Novak, Okafor, carried them forward through decades of machine shop floors, airline cockpits, and kitchen table recordings. And now, through this story, their names live on. These men deserve to be remembered. And you're helping make that happen.